Oh man, well hey, I'm looking forward to today. I've been looking forward to this message all week, and we're continuing our series. This is week 2 of a series we're doing for the month of October called Surrendered Living. And if you weren't here last weekend, I want to give you just a little recap so you can kind of know where we're at and what we're discussing. You know, we finished last month a series, a vision series, talking about know Jesus, show Jesus, talking about that we as a church exist to help people know Jesus better and help people show Jesus better. Like that is what our goal is. Like that is what we are wanting to accomplish. And we're looking at doing that in 3 different ways, or 3 different like core areas of ministry that have like subcategories. But like the first one is this, what we're doing right now, Sunday service. Sunday service that we believe is important for church members to gather together, to experience worship, to take communion, to participate in hearing messages that encourage our faith, to be able to celebrate and see people get baptized and make life change decisions. Like we believe that Sunday church is important and it's a catalyst for who we are and where we're going. The second thing that we believe in is life-giving relationships. We believe in the power of relationships, that you are called to be in relationships with fellow believers, to be able to encourage each other, to challenge each other, to help each other grow. And that can be done in several different ways. It can be joining a serve team. It can be getting in a small group. It can be going to coffee or lunch with other couples from the church. Like creating relationships in which you have a safe place in which you can be open and honest with each other. Like those relationships are important. And then the third thing, and we briefly touched on this, and we're kind of unpacking it this month, but the third thing is the idea of surrendered living. Living a life in which we surrender our thoughts and our desires to the will of what God has for us. And we have a theme verse that we kind of are wrapping this study around from Luke chapter 22, verse 41. He, speaking of Jesus, withdrew about a stone's throw beyond them, knelt down and prayed, "Father, if you are willing, take this cup from me, yet not my will, but your will be done." Last week we talked about this idea of not my will. Like our concept of being able to surrender our will and our life to God, to allow God to be the one who defines what is good and bad in our lives and to lay down our preferences. And that sometimes that's hard, that even Jesus in this moment, he's saying, if there's another way that you can take this cup from me, do it, but not my will, your will be done. And leave it to Jesus to take this idea into just a very short prayer, a 1-verse prayer, just a few words that can seem so simple, but create this entire lifetime goal of that is a process that is so large and so difficult for us to understand. Because in this prayer, we really break it down and we look at it where he says, not my will, but your will be done. He's basically giving us this opportunity and giving us this prayer in which we get to say, God, I'm going to lay down my preferences, my desires, my plans, my way of doing things. I'm going to lay those things down, and instead I'm going to dedicate my life to seeking and finding the will of the creator of the universe for me, allowing him to define what is good and bad in my life, and then once I discover that, actually obeying and doing what he asked. And you know, it's just telling you to forget all of the things you want to do and then discover the will of the creator of the universe. No big deal. And if you're sitting here and you're like, actually, that sounds like a really big deal. You're right. It's really a big deal. Do you know how hard it is to give up on what you want to do? Your own desires, your own thought, your own way of doing things? Do you know how easy it is to do something your own way, even in the name of God? Like, God told me and I'm doing it. It's like, but did he tell you to do it that way? Well, no, but it seemed like a good idea to me. It's a lifetime. Like, this is hard. This is deep things, deep thinking that we're talking about. And just because you can read over it in 1 verse, this is a lifetime of contemplation. That we're called to surrender our will and ideas of doing things, and we're supposed to discover the will. We're supposed to discover, and this almost feels like a cruel joke, we're supposed to discover the will of the God who said, my ways are not your ways, my thoughts are not your thoughts, my ways are higher than your ways. Now figure it out. It's like, God, is this a joke? You just told me I can't. You just told me I can't do it. But here's the good news. When we read and we talk about that the same spirit that rose Jesus from the dead lives inside of you, we believe it. And when we say the Spirit goes out to perform all truth in your life, he is living inside of you, giving you the ability to understand the wisdom that comes from God and to know the good, pleasing, and perfect of God's will in your life. And so finding God's will for our life is something that is massive. When we say not my will, which is a huge part in actually walking in that, but when we say your will be done and discovering that will in our life, that is something that is going to be unique to every person in this room, because everyone here has an intimate, purposeful relationship with God in which he has a calling and purpose and plans for you directly. But there is some framework that we can look at, some universal truths that we can wrap our lives around and find. And we won't be able to cover everything in one sermon, but I want to take a look at one concept and see how we can look at this idea and find God's will, or at least a framework in which we can find God's will in our lives and what that means, especially within the context of surrendered living. And to do this, I kind of want to take something back and kind of look at something different. So when we look at the time of the Bible, when the Bible was written, and this is true whether it was Old Testament or New Testament, almost every person living on the face of the earth was living under the rule and the reign of some kind of a monarchy figure, a ruler of some kind. Sometimes they call them kings, sometimes they call them pharaohs, sometimes they call them Caesar or emperor. There's a lot of different names, but they all lived under some kind of hierarchy, and they found themselves under the rule of these different governments. The Bible is really rich historically because you see many of the major world nations that were historically there mentioned. You have Egyptians, you have Assyrians, you have Babylonians, you have Persians, you have Greeks, you have Romans. They're all mentioned in these contexts. And we get to see this history, but there's something that many of these different cultures all had in common about their rulers, which was this. It was, especially in the Old Testament, what was really believed in the Old Testament that was very common was that the ruler, whoever was ruler, they had one of two beliefs. They either believed that they were God themselves, like pharaohs believed that they were physical gods, like that is who they were. Or you had the people who believed that they were God's representative here, like they were almost like a demigod representing who God was. Like that was a very common belief and almost universally to every single nation during biblical times. And as a result of this, these gods who were not just put by their might or by their ideas or by their intellect, but they were put there by God, that they then in turn had the right to describe what was good and what was bad, to define laws and rules, to be able to rule and reign and make decisions whether people liked it or not. And they would have, it was very common to have their people create and build monuments or images about their greatness. That was very common. And people would even worship to these monuments. In fact, historically, there was a very popular during the Roman time when Jesus was born. It was one of the major religions was the worship of Caesar himself. In fact, you may not know this, but the Jewish nation was the only nation that became subservient that did not actually practice Caesar worship because it was so core against their religious beliefs. But they did burn incense for Caesar every single day. But there's this idea, there's this image, this worship of this man, this ideology. But there was one nation that stood out that was so different, that was so countercultural to everything else, and that was the nation of Israel. By the point in our story when they get a king that started with Saul and then transitioned into David, they were told very specifically that these people are not God themselves, and nor are they gods or sub-gods. They are called and anointed by God, but they are in order of service to God to be able to bring goodness to his people. That was what their job was supposed to be. And so you have this very different thing. And it came from the ideas that was given to Moses, in which he said that you're never supposed to create any imagery of God. You cannot make an idol. You cannot make a cast. You cannot say that this person is God. Like, you cannot use any imagery of God. And there's two reasons that existed in the Bible. The first, which is a profound truth, is that they believed, and this is true, that you cannot create an image of the God of the universe using finite things that are found in creation itself. You cannot create the creator from creation. You cannot create an image of God using wood and stone and bricks and mortar and gold and fine jewels. Like, you cannot do it. It is impossible to create the one who spoke those things into existence using those very things. So you cannot create an image of God. God was specific, even in all the drawings of the tabernacle or all the drawings of the temple, that there was no image that this is what God looks like. because it can't be consumed. And the Israelites really didn't like that rule, and that's why, like, after they gave the commandments, they left and they made a golden calf because they just wanted something that they could worship at, that they could see. But there's a second reason. There's a second reason that there was never to be an image created of God, and that is because God had already created an image of himself. He wasn't going to do it again. He already created an image of himself. And so therefore, that image existed for people to see. Genesis chapter 1, verse 27 says this, "So God created mankind in his own image. In the image of God, he created them, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said to them, 'Be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, rule over the fish in the sea and the birds in the sky, and over every living creature that moves on the ground.' Then God said, 'I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds in the sky and all the creatures that move along the ground, everything that has breath and of life in it, I give every green plant for food.' And it was so." So when God created man and woman, it says that he created them in his image, that he created man and woman to be the very image bearers of God, created in God's image. And I want you to think about what he's saying here. He told them, "I'm going to create you in the image." And the one who is the creator, God, the one who has the ability to rule and reign everything that he created because it is his creation, that he is the one who can speak things into existence, that he is the one who can define good and bad and right and wrong, and the one who can make rules and regulations, that one then invites the ones who bear his image to rule with him. He says to rule and reign, to subdue and take dominion over the earth. He invites them into this process of ruling. He invites them into this process of ruling, of cultivating goodness here on earth. And he gives them this title of image bearers, made in the image of God. And he invites them, everyone, not just a select few, not just the people who are born to a certain family. He invites mankind into this process. And then he takes them in chapter 2, verse 15, it says, "The Lord took man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work and to take care of it." He gives them a purpose. He placed them in a garden and he says, "Grow and cultivate this place. Rule and reign together in the image of God. And cultivate the work that's here to create food and to create substance and to create city and to create growth and to do it in the way that God has shown them." And so man and woman are in the garden with this opportunity to rule. And the thing that God knew is that in the process of ruling, things would come up in which they didn't know the right thing to do. And his idea or his design was that in the process of relationship with him, they could go to the Creator and hear and find what is right and what is wrong and what is good. And they can use that authority and they can use that truth and they can use that as image bearers of God to distill and to give truth to creation. But we know the story and we know that they end up falling. We know that they choose to be like God instead of being led by God. And they fell, but even once they were removed from the garden, they were still the image of God. They were still called to rule and reign. In the entire Old Testament and even parts of the New Testament, we get example after example of people getting the opportunity as image bearers of God, given the opportunity to either use that power for the good of others or for selfish self-interest. And though we have some examples of people using that authority for the good of mankind, we have far more examples of people using that for selfish self-interest. And the result of selfishness is always broken relationships, pain, suffering, and death. Because selfishness is sin, and you see the wage of sin is death. Is the process of what this journey is. But God's invited all of mankind to rule and to reign, and into this process, And we see little glimpses and moments in which they try, only to fall short of finding God's will and being true image bearers of God. Though there's many examples, the one that I feel like is this great example is found in 1 Kings chapter 3. Verse 3, it says this: Solomon loved the Lord and followed all the decrees of his father David, except that Solomon too offered sacrifice and burned incense on the local places of worship. This verse is so interesting to me. I read it and it says, man, Solomon followed all of David's decrees, except he also worshiped other gods. It's like, what is the very first decree? You shall have no other gods before me. It's like, well, how far could he have gotten? He failed on number one. I did it all. Maybe your kids have done that. Have you done it? Yeah, I did it all. How much? Well, I got to this part and I stopped. It's like, that was the whole thing. I asked you to clean your room, and then you just gave me an excuse about laundry, and then you didn't clean your room. Yeah. But there's something here. There's something about how God sees in the filter of grace and mercy. But he says he did it all, but he did none of it. But there is truth. He loved God. He loved God. And we know that because we see later in Solomon's big story, he gets this encounter with God, and he gets the opportunity to ask for anything, and God gives him, he asks for wisdom, and God grants it. We get to see that. But in Solomon chapter 4, in 1 Kings chapter 4, verse 29, continuing on his story, it says, God gave Solomon very great wisdom and understanding, and knowledge as vast as the sands of the seashores. In fact, his wisdom exceeded that of all the wise men of the East and the wise men of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone, including blah, 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 blah. We don't need to know their names. Verse 32, it says, he composed some 3,000 proverbs and wrote 1,005 songs. He could speak with authority about all kinds of plants, from the great cedar of Lebanon to the tiny hyssop that grows from the cracks in the walls. He could also speak about animals, birds, small creatures, and fish. Do you notice the language that he says? This is garden language. He ruled and reigned. He knew about the birds of the air and the fish of the sea and everything that scurried. He understood the concept of the trees, big and small. He was a king, priest, and image bearer of God who was walking and trying to bring goodness to people. In fact, it says that in Solomon's day, at his highlight, every man sat under their own fig branch and tree and vine. That they were all together. They were all in this place of ruling. They were all in this place of understanding who they were called and the prosperity of what God has. That he was using his influence and his ability to lead, being an image bearer of God, to try to produce goodness for others. And it looks like it's like going to be good. And there's this like moment in this story that you think, this is it. Like he's going to make it. Like they're going to make it. He's going to lay down his selfishness, and he's going to choose to walk in selflessness, and he's going to be able to bring goodness to mankind, and he's going to build the temple, and like there's going to be this great, amazing thing. But it only takes a few chapters for that thought to fall off. Because by chapter 11, it says, now King Solomon loved many foreign women. Now remember, chapter 3, it was now God loved the Lord. Now he loves many foreign women. And here's the thing. The problem is not foreign women. I happen to be quite fond of a particular foreign woman. We just celebrated 17 years together. My wife's from, yeah. For those of you who don't know, my wife's from Colombia. That's foreign woman statement. The problem wasn't the foreign, it was the many foreign women. See, one is okay. Many was the problem. He had many, and if you think like many, well, how many is many? 2, 3, maybe some of you don't know your Bible. Like he had like 700 wives. And by the way, that wasn't enough because he still had 300 plus concubines. When they said many, he meant many. And it goes on. There is some like scriptural like problems with these women that he did, because it says besides the Pharaoh's daughter, he married women from Moab, Ammon, Edom, Sidon, among the Hittites. We read this and it's like, yeah, foreign people. Like all those people were specifically told not to marry because they were cursed. And that's who he decided to marry. You see, at some point, he stopped allowing God to define what was good, and he decided to define what was good in his own eyes. And this is the wisest person. He literally, there's parts where it talks about how kings are supposed to reign, that there's laws that kings are supposed to fill. We don't have time to do it. And literally, Solomon broke every single rule. Every single one of them. Including stuff small, like the Bible literally, like it'll tell you his story, like, oh, he had this many horses from Egypt. There's a part of the Bible that says, kings, do not buy horses from Egypt. Why? I don't know. But it was a rule, and he broke it. Because see, he was an image bearer. And he even had wisdom. And yet he still turned selfish to the things that he loved. Women, power, influence, money. You see, because when we were created in the image of God, there's something we have to remind ourselves as we look to what the answer is. You were created in the image of God. You were created with eternity in your soul. You were created with the same spirit that rose Jesus from the dead. You have eternity in your mind and your heart. You have a desire and an appetite for the infinite that has been placed inside of you to be able to looking forward to the day in which you get to spend eternity with God. But at the same moment that you are that, you were also created from dust of the earth. You are flesh, which is finite and has limitations and has shortcomings and cannot consume everything. It cannot do everything, which is why I can spend a Saturday in which I just want to go out there and have so much fun with my kids and do everything, experience everything, but after coaching 2 soccer games, I'm so tired I feel like I just need to take 3 naps. Because though I have the desire for the infinite and to miss nothing, I am limited by the very capacity of who I am as a human being. And we're placed with this dichotomy from the very beginning that you are given the desire of the infinite, but you are created with the limit of what this flesh holds. And Solomon, who was given the greatest gift of wisdom, still fell short. Still fell short. He still ultimately turned to allowing his ability to outweigh God's ability in him. So what do we do? If Solomon can't do it, how can I do it? Because the wisest man to ever walk the face of the planet couldn't figure it out and couldn't rule and reign in a long-term way, then what are my choices? I don't have a chance. But there's something we can find. Because Jesus can fix things. John 1:14 says, so the Word became human and made his home among us. He was full of unfailing love and faithfulness. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the Father's one and only Son. John testified about him when he shouted to the crowds, this is the one I was talking about when I said, someone is coming after me who is greater than I am, for he existed long before me. From his abundance, we have all received one gracious blessing after another. For the law was given through Moses, but God's unfailing love and faithfulness came through Jesus Christ. This is important. Listen. No one has ever seen God. There's no images. But the unique one, Jesus, who is himself God, is near to the Father's heart. He has revealed God to us. He has revealed the image of God to us. He has revealed what it means to look and to live like the image of God. That when we study the life of Jesus and we see the way he lived and we see what moved him and we see what he did and the life that he lived, we can see the image of God, the one in which there was no image to look to, that we can see it, the ones whose image we were created in, that we are called to bear, but many times fall short. We can look to the image of Jesus Christ and we can find the will of God. Which is why in Ephesians chapter 4, verse 21, it says, since you've heard about Jesus and have learned the truth that comes from him, throw off your old sinful nature and your former way of life, which is corrupted by lust and deception. Instead, let the Spirit renew your thoughts and attitudes. Put on your new nature, listen to this, created to be like God. What was the lie that Adam and Eve believed? If you eat this tree, you'll be like God. And yet the Spirit that now lives in you was created so that you would be like God, having him be able to define within you what is good and bad. It says, truly righteous and holy. So who is Jesus? We know that he lived. We know that he died on the cross. We know he was risen again. But if I want to be like him, what is the image that he bore? What was the way in which he lived? What was the way in which he found the will of the Father so that he in that garden, even when facing the most crucial moment of his life, the most painful time of his existence, he could still say, not my will, but your will be done. And though there's many things that I think we could see about his love and his compassion and his faithfulness, I think that Matthew chapter 20, verse 24 tells us something. It says, when the 10 other disciples heard what James and John had asked, they were indignant. Just so you know, James and John had asked them, hey, when you come into your kingdom, can we sit at your left and your right hand so that we can be like your number one and number two guys, because we really want to be important in the kingdom. Because they were still confused that they believed that when Jesus came to rule and reign, it was a physical kingdom. But it wasn't. And they argued about this all the time. So they asked in private, and then the other 10 got upset. That's just like the thing. Because they were always like, who's the greatest? Who's the greatest? Who's the most? Who do you love the most? And then he said this, but Jesus called them together and said, you know that the rulers in this world lord it over their people, and officials flaunt their authority over those under them. Speaking of all time to this moment, how people rule, how people reign, what it means to be an authority. And Jesus says, but among you it will be different. Whoever wants to be a leader among you must be your servant. And whoever wants to be first among you must become your slave. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve others, and to give his life as a ransom for many. Even the Son of Man. Even the image of God came to serve, not to be served. So and the story in John chapter 13 is always so powerful to me, that he's in this home and he and his disciples are there, and Jesus realizes that no one had received the ceremonial foot washing ceremony because they were being slighted by the people who had invited them to dinner, because traditionally it would be the lowest ranking person in the household had to wash feet. Whether that was a slave or a servant, or if it was just your disciples, it would have been the lowest disciple. And yet Jesus, the one who was seated at the honor place, Jesus, the one who was the leader, Jesus, the one who they believed to be the Messiah, it says that he took off his robes. And remember, these are the robes that later were gambled for. That he took off his robes and put on the apron of a servant and washed the feet of his disciples. This is not just a physical exercise of what servant leadership looks like. I'm not telling you, if you want to figure out how to find the will of God, then to wash everyone's feet that you come in contact with. I don't suggest it. This is an even bigger spiritual truth. He literally in this moment, this is the exact existence of what he did. He came and he took off his robes. Just like Jesus took off his own deity and laid it down so that the word could become flesh. And he put on the robes of the servant, and he washed all of mankind. That in this moment is this action, is this physical thing of service in which he lays his deity down, his standing down, and lowers himself to serve those around him. Colossians 3 verse 12 says, since God has chosen you to be the holy people he loves, you must clothe yourself with tender-hearted mercy, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Make allowance for each other's faults and forgive anyone who offends you. Remember, the Lord forgave you, and you must forgive others. Above all, clothe yourself with love, which binds us together in perfect harmony. And let the peace that comes from Christ rule in your hearts. For as members of one body, you are called to live in peace and always be thankful. If you want to know what God looks like, we look at Jesus. And if you want to know what Jesus was, is he served. He served others. He lowered himself and served others. Not the ones who deserved it, not the ones who earned it, not the ones who were important. He served others. To be an image bearer of God means to be one who is willing to think as others, as greater than themselves, to lower themselves into the capacity to serve, not just when it's convenient, not just whenever you get something out of it, but to reduce yourself and to see others as better than yourself. And that may be difficult for some of us here because of the pride and the arrogance, but one thing that has helped me in my journey of humbling myself and understanding who God has called me to be is to realize that these people that God is calling me to, these people that God's putting in my path, these people that I sometimes think don't deserve it or I don't have time for, that they were made in the image of God. And the ones who have different political views than me or look different than me or speak different than me or post different than me, that those people still are image bearers of God himself. And if I cannot humble myself before God himself, then what am I doing in this process of living like Jesus? I am an image bearer of God. You are an image bearer of God. I want to look like Jesus, which means I need to serve people. And it's within serving, being selfless. It's within using the gifting of being called to rule and reign by creating things for others that are better, by being selfless and not selfish, and serving those around me, that I can not only look like God, but I can find his will for my life. It's not always easy. There are plenty of reasons not to. It's hard, it's scary, I don't have time, it's going to be inconvenient, I have other things to do. They scare me, they offend me. Serving is such an important part of who we're called to. It's the very life that Jesus led. That's why we as a church, that's why we're here, that's why we compel you and we say, hey, we want you to serve. And we create opportunities here within church for you to serve, because we believe that serving is not just something that opens doors or creates coffee or watches kids, that serving is an opportunity for us to submit our lives to the will of God and allow him to work in us and through us. And here's the thing, serving is so important to me. I don't care if you do it here. I'd love you to serve in the church because I believe that what we're doing and the mission, but maybe that's not what works for you. But I'm telling you, you need to serve somewhere. You should serve. You should serve your spouse. You should serve your family. You should serve your family. You should serve your coworkers. You should serve in some other location. You should be at a place where you can serve and lay your life down and to be able to show and reflect the image of God. We want to create places here because we want to create opportunities for people where it can be easy to come together and serve and build relationships. But I am telling you, whether it's here or someone else, if you want to reflect the image of God, then we have to continue to walk in a lifestyle of service to others. Jesus didn't come to be served, but to serve. And we don't do it. Here's the thing. We don't do it to get rewards. We don't do it to get extra love. We do it because it reflects the very image of God that has been placed inside of you. And you say, how can I do it? How can I do it? How can I do it? Galatians chapter 5 says this, so I say, let the Holy Spirit guide your lives. Then you won't be doing what your sinful nature craves. The sinful nature wants to do evil, which is just opposite of what the Spirit wants. And the Spirit gives us desires that are opposite of what the sinful nature desires. These two forces are constantly fighting each other, so you are not free to carry out your good intentions. But the Holy Spirit produces these kind of fruit in our lives: love and joy and peace and patience and kindness and goodness and faithfulness, gentleness and self-control. There is no law against these things. Those who belong to Christ, those who are the image bearers of Christ, have nailed the passions and desires of their sinful nature to the cross and crucified them there. Since we are living by the Spirit, let us follow the Spirit's leading in every part of our lives. You and I have something greater than Solomon ever had, which is the very living Spirit inside of you, who gives you wisdom and guidance and can help you stop doing the things that you don't want to do and start doing the things that you want to do, who can bring up opportunities in your life and say, here is a chance for you to love like Jesus loved, which means loving people selflessly. Here's an opportunity for you to continue to grow in your intimate relationship of knowing God. And here's an opportunity for you to show Jesus to people around you. We want to be the image bearers of God, then we can live like Jesus. And we want to live like Jesus, then we can realize that there are people in our community who desperately need to be served. And how you serve looks different. Every opportunity is unique. But we are a church that is equipped with people who can go in our community and show Jesus through the heart of service. You get to do that in your workplace, in your families, in your relationships. I get to do that in the people that I encounter. Serving is important. Not because it just gets things done, but because it makes us where we're not being controlled by our human nature, which is always going to be selfish and self-interested. And when we get outside of that, we can see the freedom that comes from selfless living. We can see the freedom that comes from others first. We can see the freedom that comes from living a life that looks like Jesus. We get to walk in that today. And so here's the thing. I want to close this and encourage you with this. If you're here and you serve, thank you for serving, whether it's here in our church or wherever you're serving. Continue to do so. But I want you to take a moment and to allow your mind and your heart to think, are you serving with the heart and the capacity and the way in which it's an image of Christ? And if so, awesome, keep going. There's been areas in my life that I've had to make a shift because my motivation was wrong. But if you're here and you don't have a capacity in which you can serve, I want to encourage you to do it. If you want to serve here, great. We got a lot of opportunities. We got a lot of cool stuff. Not golf cart ministry, but we got other good stuff. If you want to serve somewhere else, there's so many amazing places. If you want to serve your family, serve your family. Find somewhere where service can be part of your daily life. Who you were created to be. And it'll change you. Let's pray. Father, thank you for today. Lord, thank you that we can bear your image. We can look to Jesus to see what that image looks like. Lord, if he came to lay down his life and to serve man, then Father God, we can pray not our will, but your will be done. Love and serve those people in our community and our families. Thank you that your Spirit empowers us and emboldens us and encourages us in which way to go. Lord, surrender is so hard sometimes. Thank you that your grace and your Spirit is here with us every moment to help us live a life of surrender. And the peace that comes from being in relationship with Christ. If there's anyone who's here today, maybe you haven't accepted Jesus, I want to give you a chance to do it before we dismiss. I'm just going to ask you to pray this prayer and repeat after me. I'm going to ask everyone to say it. Just say, Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for sending Jesus to die for me, so my sins could be forgiven and so my heart could be set free. In Jesus' holy name I pray. With every head bowed for just a minute more. If you made a decision today to accept Jesus, would you raise your hand up real high? Just wherever you're at, raise your hand really high. Any hands that are up can go down. Look up here, last thing, church. Living a life of surrender as we walk through this is not comfortable. It's not easy. But it's light. As you walk through these weeks and as we talk and as you discuss it at home with your family and your friends and your kids and your small group, like as we walk through this, don't forget it's not all on you. That the grace of God is there with you to encourage you, to help you, to pick you up when you make mistakes. But there's a freedom that only surrender can bring. And we get to encourage each other in that journey. We get to walk in that journey together to find it through the power of the Holy Spirit. Hey, listen, you are loved. You are prayed for. If you need prayer today, our prayer team is going to be down here at the front. They would love to pray with you today. For those who are on the serve team gathering tonight, I can't wait to see you tonight. For everyone else, have a great week. You are dismissed.